May 16th, 2021. Behind the Scene with David Bedein. Over the last 24 hours, 1,242 missiles shot from the UNRWA refugee camps, United Nations Relief and Works Agency refugee camps in Gaza, where more than 1 million Arabs live there under what they call the premise of the right of return. People who are descended from Arabs who fled Israel in 1948 during the war, and they and their descendants have been there ever since. There are a total of 5 million Palestinian Arab refugees who are being taken care of by UNRWA in Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. Well, anyway, 2 million of them, 2 million Arabs live in Gaza, and of the 2 million who live in Gaza, 1.6 million live in these UNRWA refugee camps. Now, UNRWA refugee camps should be following the principles of the United Nations and act in a peaceable manner. However, what we have done has been to examine these schools very intensely over the last 20 years, and I'm talking about the Bedein Center for Near East Policy Research. And you can see our website. We have two websites, IsraelBehindTheNews.com and one which consolidates all of our research on UNRWA, known as UNRWA-monitor.com. And what we've shown over the last few years, and 24 films, and we're making a new film now, is how military training takes place in these camps. And the theme of the camps is what they call right of return by force of arms. That doesn't really mean that they're ascribing to the United Nations principles of which is peace starts here. Every United Nations school is supposed to ascribe to the idea of peace starts here, not UNRWA. So the idea is that UNRWA has been firing these weapons, allowing terror groups to take position in the UNRWA camps, and basically they're holding on to those positions in order to protect the civilians there. What's vital to understand is that our agency, the Bedein Center for Near East Policy Research, sent an official letter to the heads of the United Nations, to the Office of the Secretary General, with whom we've met on 6 occasions. They know who we are and what we're bringing to the table. And we wrote on Friday, May 14th, 2021, an official letter to the heads of the UN, to the Secretary General. Please do everything possible to disarm Hamas so that you do not incur any civilian casualties. Well, there was no response. So we sent a letter to all the donor nations, and you'll see the donor nations on the screen here. All the donor nations to UNRWA, who supply $1.2 billion to UNRWA in the past year, and this coming year it will be $1.5 billion. And the question is, would you please, if you're giving them money, make it as a requirement that these camps should not be basically military garrisons, which is what they are right now. In the past, we have made several films where we show the children going through military training from these UNRWA camps. To say that that's not appropriate for a United Nations facility is an understatement. Now, one of the demands being made by the terror groups is that Israel enter into a ceasefire agreement according to how it's translated into English. However, there is no ceasefire in the word Arabic. In the Arabic terms used, it's called a hudna. Now, hudna, you'll see on our website, IsraelBehindTheNews.com, the Islamic Encyclopedia definition of hudna, which is a temporary treaty which can be approved or abrogated at any time. And in the history of hudnas between Arabs and Jews, when Muhammad made a hudna with Jews, he said with the Jewish community in Saudi Arabia, it lasted for 3 years, and then after 3 years, all of a sudden, Muhammad ordered the Jews to be executed en masse and to be massacred. So that's the nature of hudna. That doesn't come through in the West in any of the Western media. Now, what's very important to understand is that there have been casualties over the last at least 12 Israelis killed by these rockets. A man in Ramat Gan in central Israel, and 2 Israeli Arabs actually in the city of Lod and also a elderly woman in the city of Ashkelon. She's 80 years old, and the person who was her caretaker, an Indian, was killed along with her. So this is we're just starting to feel it. And on Friday there was the funeral of a 5.5-year-old boy in the city of Ashkelon. So this is very, very serious stuff. This is not something, we're not playing games. When people say rockets, they think rockets from Disneyland or something. This is very serious. This is lethal. These are lethal weapons, and what this is not coming through in the Western media. Now, the concept of asking UNRWA to behave as a United Nations agency sounds totally reasonable, except that UNRWA operates under very different criteria than any other UN agency. All UN agencies carry with them a board of directors, a constitution, ways in which you can follow through when things go wrong. UNRWA doesn't have that. All power is invested in the UNRWA Secretary General. What's important to understand, also called the UNRWA Commissioner. What's very important to understand is that our agency, this is the Bedein Center for Near East Policy Research, has met on 6 occasions with the UNRWA, with the United Nations Secretary General's office. And they've made it very clear that the people who control UNRWA, or are supposed to oversee UNRWA, are none other than the donor nations. You can see these donor nations as you examine them right now to see who is giving the $1.2 billion, which is increasing this year to $1.5 billion. The idea to keep people in refugee camps on what they call the premise of the right of return. And they've added over the last 3 years, right of return by force of arms. Is this a United Nations agency? It doesn't sound like one. That's why we're bringing this to your attention today. It's also very important to understand that UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, their mandate is renewed every 3 years, and so far they have continued since 1949, keeping people in these refugee camps. And who are the people who are living there? People who were descended from the Arabs who left Israel in 1948, some by force, some not by force. Now, at that time was 500,000 Arab refugees. Now we're talking about 5 million Arab refugees. And the focus of their education, of their school system, is very surprising. What the Bedein Center for Near East Policy Research did was to take all 1,000 school books supplied by the Palestinian Authority and examine them, translate them, and give a report into the UN. And actually, we've not given one report, we've given 10 reports over the last 20 years since UNRWA adopted the PA school system. And what have we found? That these school books are basically war manuals, and that's not something appropriate. And there'd been one school book that promoted peace, we would have put that out in a minute. So there you have it. We shall see what's going to be now. Whether or not with one donor nation or the UN itself asks that the UNRWA facilities be demilitarized, lives will be saved, both amongst the Israeli soldiers, the Israeli civilians, and the Arab civilians who are not really involved in these attacks. The idea of having people, what we've shown in our films, is the extent to which the children go through weapons training with live weapons every summer, and it's not something new. It's just that most people have ignored this issue. This is David Bedein, Behind the Scene with David Bedein.
More than 70 years after the 1948 Arab-Israeli War, over 2 million Palestinians are registered with United Nations refugee camps in Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza. The camps are run by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, known as UNRWA. The $1.2 billion UN organization operates with little oversight and a Wild West mindset that is best known for corruption. It uses its schools as a political platform to indoctrinate children. Children are imbued with a mix of political and religious propaganda that encourages jihad, or holy war. They are taught that Israel must be destroyed and replaced by a Palestinian country. Recently, there's been a subtle strategic shift in Palestinian politics. Students are now being told that education is central to their future. But their traditional narrative remains the same. Leaders, parents, and teachers continue to emphasize that one day, Palestinians will be granted the right of return, a demand that would allow refugees to take back villages from before 1948 that no longer exist. Palestinian children are taught that their real homes are in cities in modern-day Israel, not far from where they now live. When we visited the Aida UNRWA refugee camp in Bethlehem, students expressed their nationalistic identity near the camp entrance. A massive key sits above the main entry, serving as the Palestinian symbol of the right of return.
أنا ريان طارق عمري 6 سنين.
من أي قرية أنت ريان؟
من قرية المالحة.
أنا اسمي غزل كوار وأنا أصلي الحقيقي من قرية المالحة وأنا لاجئة من قرية المالحة وأنا ساكن هالكيت في المخيم ويا ريت إحنا نرجع هالكيت على وطننا مشان إحنا بنشتاق له كثير.
أنا اسمي ياسا وعمري 10 سنين ومن قرية المالحة.
أنا من سهير عواد بشتغل في مركز الرواد معلمة في وحدة التعليم. أنا من قرية المالحة.
This is modern-day Malcha in Jerusalem. It's now a prominent residential neighborhood. It's also a center for high tech, home of the city's largest shopping mall and the site of Jerusalem's sports stadium. While taught the right of return, there's no mixed message from Palestinian leadership when it comes to the subject of peace. At the entrance of the same UNRWA camp where these students are taught, Palestinians held a demonstration against the United States and the peace process. They burned effigies of President Donald Trump and Vice President Mike Pence.
حكم الإعدام بحق الرئيس الأمريكي بتهمة خيانة الفلسطينيين وتسريب القدس وبيع القدس إلى الإسرائيليين.
رسالة الشعب الفلسطيني اليوم وبأنه لا يمكن أن يقبل بما يسمى صفقة القرن.
من يصادر أموال الشعب الفلسطيني ومن يحاول إغلاق مؤسسات الأونروا في محاولة لقطع حياة ومعيشة الناس يجب أن يحاكم ويجب أن يحاكم بجريمة قتل الأرواح وهذا جزء من المحاكمة الشعبية التجري لهذه القيادة الأمريكية.
These days, education is the buzzword in Palestinian schools.
أبهزم اليهود بالعلم تبعي فهيك احنا بتصير الوحدة مع بعض وهيك انا بعلمي بهزم اليهود.
انا عشان ارجع قريتي من طريق العلم وعشان اقاوم في الحجار.
At a gleaming new cultural children's center in Aida, children learn computer skills and dance programs. While the center's director stresses education, his desire for jihad is not far from his office desk. On a wall hangs this dictum: "Here we will stay. In Lydda, in Ramla, in the Galilee, we shall remain, like a wall on your chest, and in your throat like a shard of glass, a cactus thorn, and in your eyes a sandstorm." When we asked students about their future, they told us there's no curriculum for coexistence or recognition of Israel. Rather, above all, their ideology is still focused on violence and armed struggle with Israel, which they hope will result in the creation of one state, the country of Palestine.
طب إيش بدك تصير لما تكبر؟
أصير رئيس حرر فلسطين. نفسي أصير رئيس زي أبو عمار وصدام حسين.
شو ممكن لازم نسوي مع اليهود عشان نحل الموضوع؟
نقاومهم فسرت حجارة طخ عليه بعلم شهادة.
فيش شيء اسمه دولة واحدة أو شيء اسمه دولتين، ها بس اسمها فلسطين وراح تظل طول عمرها فلسطين، وما أخذ بالقوة سيسترد فقط بالقوة.
لازم نسترد الأرض بالقوة يعني، أخذوها بالقوة لازم نستردها بالقوة، فيش حل آخر يعني. الدولة لنا يعني كيف يجوا ياخذوا الأرض منا أو يتقاسموها معنا؟ بزبطش، حقنا هون.
ممكن يعني يصير في ممكن يكون في سلام بين الدولتين او
اكيد لا، بعد كل هالشهداء والجرحى والاسرى اكيد لا. بعدين ارضنا يعني زي ما حكيت لك بزبطش.
طب شو الحل يعني؟
ان نستردها بالقوه الارض، ان نجتمع العرب يجتمعوا ويرجعوا زي ما موجود في القران الكريم، انه راح يجي حدا يحررها. شخص كيف صلاح الدين اجى عصر صلاح الدين، راح يجي واحد زي صلاح الدين ويحرر فلسطين.
They also praised Mohammed Asaf, the official youth ambassador for UNRWA.
أنا بعرف أغاني محمد عساف، إنها حلوة، إنها لبلدنا هي الأغاني.
شو بتعرف أغاني محمد عساف؟
عن دم فلسطين.
Among Arab youth, Asaf is wildly popular for his violent music videos that promote jihad and the destruction of Israel.
كل شيء كوفية على الكوفية.
This film reinforces the fact that children of all ages who attend a modern UN school minutes away from Jerusalem are taught to continue the war against the Jews from morning to night. As the UNRWA mandate is being renewed, the time has come for the UN agency to teach education for peace.